The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of Centauri Prime as 12-year-old Marcus Chun pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced glass. His breath fogged the surface as he watched the alien city stretch endlessly toward the horizon, its towers pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried information faster than any human technology could manage. "Amazing, isn't it?" came a melodic voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Lyra approaching, her azure skin shimmering with the subtle patterns that indicated a Centauri's emotional state. Today, those patterns swirled with curiosity and something that might have been fondness. Her large, violet eyes reflected the city's glow as she moved with a fluid grace that made all Centauri seem like they were dancing through life. Marcus nodded, unable to find words. 3 months ago, he'd been just another kid in the outer colonies, helping his parents run a small terraforming station on a backwater world nobody cared about. Then the first contact protocols had activated, and everything changed. The Centauri collective had emerged from the void, not as conquerors but as observers, seeking to understand the strange bipedal species that had somehow developed faster than light travel, without first mastering harmony with their environment. The Centauri had been fascinated by humanity's chaotic creativity, their ability to find solutions through what the aliens called beautiful inefficiency. Where Centauri society moved like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, humanity stumbled forward through trial and error, somehow achieving remarkable results through sheer determination and an almost reckless willingness to experiment. Marcus had been selected for the cultural exchange program, partly because of his parents' xenobiology expertise, but mostly because the Centauri found human children particularly intriguing. Adult humans, they'd observed, often carried too much defensive conditioning to truly embrace new ways of thinking. Children, however, possess what the Centauri termed cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt and learn without the rigid frameworks that calcified with age. "My grandmother wants to meet you today," Lyra said, settling beside him with that peculiar way Centauri had of making every movement seem effortless. "She's one of the memory keepers." Marcus had heard about the memory keepers during his orientation briefings. They were ancient Centauri who served as living libraries, their enhanced neural networks capable of storing and perfectly recalling thousands of years of collective history, culture, and wisdom. Meeting one was considered an extraordinary honor, even for the diplomatic corps. "Why me?" Marcus asked, genuinely puzzled. He was just a kid from nowhere, struggling to keep up with lessons in quantum mechanics and xenocultural theory alongside teenagers who'd been groomed for diplomatic careers since birth. Lyra's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated amusement, mixed with something deeper, more serious. "Because you asked her about the singing crystals yesterday." Marcus remembered. During a tour of the city's power grid, he noticed that the massive crystal formations seemed to emit different harmonics at different times of day. While the other exchange students had focused on the technical specifications, Marcus had wondered if the crystals were actually communicating with each other, creating a city-wide consciousness that could share thoughts and feelings across vast distances. His question had been dismissed by the human instructors as anthropomorphizing alien technology, but apparently, the Centauri had found it insightful. The transport that carried them to the Memory Keeper's sanctuary moved without vibration, riding magnetic fields through tubes that wove between the city's organic architecture. Marcus watched through transparent walls as they passed through different districts, each specialized for different aspects of Centauri society. The artisan quarter glowed with warm, creative energy as Centauri crafted objects that blended function with impossible beauty. The research district hummed with cool, analytical patterns where scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. "Your people," Lyra said thoughtfully as they traveled, "they don't live in harmony like this. Your cities, they fight with themselves, don't they?" Marcus considered this. He thought about New Shanghai's endless sprawl, where corporate towers cast shadows over refugee camps, where maglev trains screamed overhead while people below struggled to find clean water. Yeah, he admitted, we're not very good at working together. But sometimes it's why we're good at solving problems nobody else can solve. Explain. Well, Marcus struggled to put complex thoughts into words. When everyone agrees on everything, you might miss important solutions because they don't fit the pattern. Humans argue about everything, so we end up trying crazy ideas that probably shouldn't work, but sometimes do. Lyra's patterns shifted to deep contemplation. The harmony versus chaos paradigm. Grandmother will find this perspective valuable. The sanctuary sat at the heart of an artificial mountain, its chambers carved from living crystal that had been coaxed to grow into impossible geometric forms. Memory Keeper Ashai was ancient even by Zentari standards, her skin bearing the intricate scarification that marked centuries of accumulated wisdom. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire civilizations. The young human who thinks our city dreams, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls resonate. Sit, child of chaos. Tell me about promises. Marcus blinked, uncertain. Promises? Your species makes them frequently, often without understanding their true weight. What promise would you make to a friend from another star? Marcus glanced at Lyra, then back at the ancient being whose presence seemed to fill the chamber with timeless patience. He thought about his life back home, about the parents who'd sacrificed everything to give him this opportunity, about the vast universe opening before him, like a book written in languages he was only beginning to understand. I would promise to remember, he said finally, to learn everything I could, and to never forget what it was like to see the universe through someone else's eyes. Ashai's scarification began to glow softly, and Lyra's patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated profound surprise. A memory keeper's promise, the ancient Zentari murmured, from one who has not yet learned what memory truly means. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Marcus's cultural briefings. Ashai led them through passages that spiraled deeper into the mountain, past chambers where other memory keepers sat in meditation, their consciousness linked to the vast network that preserves Zentari civilization's accumulated knowledge. Some had been sitting motionless for decades, their minds exploring virtual realms where historical events could be experienced as if they were happening in real time. Memory is not simply recording, Ashai explained as they walked. It is understanding the connections between all things, seeing how each moment flows into the next like water, finding its course through stone. Your people experience time as a straight line, but we have learned to see it as a vast web where every thread touches every other thread. They emerged into a chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The walls were covered in what looked like neural networks made of crystal, pulsing with slow, hypnotic rhythms. In the center stood a pedestal holding something that made Marcus's eyes water to look at directly. It seemed to shift between being a crystal, a flower, and something that might have been alive. The heart of memory, Lyra whispered, her patterns now showing reverence mixed with excitement. I've never seen it before. Ashai approached the pedestal and placed her hands on its surface. Immediately, the crystal networks throughout the chamber blazed with light, and Marcus felt something touch the edges of his mind. Vast, gentle, impossibly complex. Your promise, young Marcus, Ashai said, her voice now seeming to come from everywhere at once. The heart of memory would like to examine it. Marcus didn't understand what was happening, but he felt no fear. The presence touching his thoughts was curious, kind, utterly alien, but somehow familiar. Images flashed through his mind, not as memories, but memories of memories, scenes from across the galaxy, showing countless species making their first steps toward understanding each other. Then he saw something that made him gasp. It was Earth, but not the Earth he knew. This was Earth centuries in the future, its cities gleaming with technology that combined human innovation with alien wisdom. Humans and dozens of other species worked together, exploring galaxies that hadn't even been discovered yet. But in this vision, there was something wrong. The humans looked diminished somehow, as if they'd lost some essential quality that made them uniquely themselves. They'd gained harmony and efficiency, but at the cost of the chaotic creativity that had made them valuable to the galactic community in the first place. The vision shifted, showing Marcus another possible future. Here, humans had retained their essential nature, but had learned to channel it constructively. Their cities were still chaotic by Centauri standards, but it was a productive chaos that generated innovations no other species could conceive. Earth had become a crucial hub of galactic civilization precisely because humans brought perspectives that no one else could provide. Two paths, Ashai's voice echoed in his mind. Your species stands at a crossroads, young Marcus. They can learn harmony and lose themselves, or they can remain true to their nature and become something the galaxy has never seen before. The choice will come down to individuals who understand both worlds. The presence in his mind grew stronger, more focused. Your promise to remember, to learn, to see through alien eyes while remaining human. This is the key. But promises made in childhood are tested by the trials of adulthood. Are you prepared for what remembering will cost? Marcus didn't understand the question, but he felt the weight of it. Somehow, this moment would echo through his entire life. I promise, he said again, but this time the words seemed to carve themselves into reality itself. The light faded, and Marcus found himself back in the crystal chamber, Lyra supporting him as his legs threatened to give out. Ashai watched him with new intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. The heart has accepted your promise, she said quietly. It will remember, even when you forget. And when the time comes to choose between paths, it will remind you of what you swore here today. I don't understand, Marcus managed to say. You will, Ashai replied. When you're no longer a boy, when the weight of promises made and innocence threatens to crush the man you've become, you will understand. The heart of memory has seen your future, Marcus Chun. It has seen the choice you will face and the price you will pay for keeping your word. Lyra's patterns had shifted to deep concern. Grandmother, what did you show him? Ashai's ancient eyes fixed on Marcus with something that might have been pity. I showed him what love of truth costs when truth becomes inconvenient. I showed him the moment when he must choose between his own happiness and the future of two civilizations. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crystal chamber's temperature. What choice? The choice that comes to all who promise to remember truly, Ashai said. The choice between comfortable lies and difficult truths, between personal desire and universal responsibility, between the love of one and the needs of many. The ceremony ended with Marcus receiving a small crystal pendant, no larger than his thumbnail, but containing what Ashai called a fragment of the heart's memory. It would help him remember this moment when memory became difficult, she explained. It would also serve as proof of his promise, should proof ever be required. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, Lyra caught his arm. Her patterns showed emotions Marcus couldn't quite read: worry, anticipation, something that might have been affection. Marcus, she said, whatever happens in the future, whatever choice you have to make, remember that some of us believe in the promise you made today. What are you talking about? Marcus asked, but Lyra had already turned away, her patterns shifting to that closed, formal configuration that meant as Centauri had said all they intended to say. The journey back to the diplomatic quarter passed in contemplative silence. Marcus fingered the crystal pendant, feeling its warmth against his chest, wondering what he'd committed himself to. The memory keeper's words echoed in his mind, a choice between his own happiness and the future of two civilizations. At 12 years old, he couldn't imagine what such a choice would look like. He was just a kid who liked asking questions and who'd been lucky enough to make friends with an alien girl. How could anything he did affect the fate of entire civilizations? But as their transport glided through Centauri Prime's glowing streets, Marcus caught glimpses of human diplomats meeting with Centauri officials, their conversations shaping treaties that would determine how two radically different species would coexist in an increasingly crowded galaxy. He saw human entrepreneurs working with Centauri artists to create hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone. He saw the future taking shape in real time, built on the foundation of understanding between individuals who'd learned to see past their differences. Maybe it was possible for one person to make a difference. Maybe the promises made by children were the most important ones of all, because children hadn't yet learned that some things were impossible. That night, lying in his quarters aboard the diplomatic station, Marcus stared out at the alien constellations and made another promise, this one to himself. Whatever the choice was that awaited him, whatever price the Memory Keeper had foreseen, he would be ready for it. He had no way of knowing that his promise would be tested far sooner than anyone expected, or that the test would come in the form of the very friendship that had made the promise possible. The crystal pendant pulsed gently against his chest, storing memories of a moment that would echo through decades of interstellar politics, technological development, and personal sacrifice. The boy who made a promise had no idea that keeping it would require him to become the man who would one day return bearing not just memories, but responsibilities that would determine the shape of humanity's future among the stars. 23 years had passed since Marcus Chun last set foot on Centauri Prime, but the city's bioluminescent spires still made his breath catch in his throat. Now 35, he stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic cruiser Harmony's Edge, watching the same vista that had captivated him as a boy. The city had grown, its organic towers reaching higher into the amber sky, but the essential beauty remained unchanged. What had changed was Marcus himself, and the weight of responsibility that pressed down on his shoulders like gravity from a world far heavier than Earth. The crystal pendant still hung around his neck, warm against his skin, even through the formal diplomatic uniform that marked him as Earth's youngest ambassador to the Centauri Collective. The pendant had been his constant companion through university, through the accelerated diplomatic program, through the years of careful maneuvering that had brought him to this moment. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he could feel it pulse with what might have been approval or warning. "Ambassador Chun," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Captain Sarah Rodriguez approaching, her expression carefully neutral. "We're receiving docking clearance from Centauri Central Authority. Your friend has requested permission to meet you at the boarding platform." Marcus nodded, suppressing the flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with the fact that he was about to see Lyra for the first time since the cultural exchange program ended. They'd maintained communication over the years, but sporadic messages through official channels were poor substitutes for actual conversation. He'd followed her career as she rose through the ranks of Centauri society, becoming one of their most respected xenocultural analysts. She tracked his own meteoric rise through Earth's diplomatic corps with what her messages suggested was pride mixed with concern. Now, they would meet again under circumstances neither had anticipated when they were children learning to bridge the gap between species. The boarding platform extended from the ship's hull, interfacing seamlessly with Centauri docking technology that guided the process with organic precision. Marcus stepped through the airlock into an environment that felt like coming home to a place he'd never lived. The air carried scents of crystalline flowers and ozone, while harmonics from the city's communication network provided a subtle musical backdrop that seemed to welcome visitors in frequencies just below human hearing. Lyra was waiting for him. She stood with the same graceful poise he remembered, but 23 years had refined her natural elegance into something approaching artistry. Her azure skin bore new patterns now, the intricate scarification that marked her as a senior cultural analyst, each line representing years of study and accumulated wisdom. Her violet eyes held depths that spoke of experiences that had shaped her from the curious girl he'd known into someone who carried the weight of two civilizations' future. "Marcus," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made his name sound like music. "Welcome home." The words hit him harder than expected. Home. Not welcome to Centauri Prime, not greetings to the human ambassador, but welcome home. As if the place where he'd made his promise as a boy was indeed where he belonged. Lyra, he replied, extending his hand in the human gesture they'd practiced as children. She took it, her skin warm and slightly textured in a way that triggered vivid memories of exploration and discovery. You look incredible. The scarification suits you. Her skin patterns shifted to what he still remembered indicated pleasure tinged with melancholy. And you look like you carry too much responsibility for someone who used to ask if her crystals dreamed. Though I suspect the boy who asked that question is still in there somewhere. She wasn't wrong. The years of diplomatic training had taught Marcus to present a carefully controlled facade, to speak in measured phrases that revealed nothing while saying everything, to think 3 moves ahead in conversations that might determine the fate of worlds. But, standing here with Lyra, feeling the familiar weight of the crystal pendant against his chest, he felt some of that careful control slip away. Marcus admitted, though he's been buried under a lot of political necessity lately. Lyra's patterns shifted to concern. The hegemony situation? Marcus nodded grimly. The hegemony situation was why he was here, why Earth's government had sent their most experienced xenocultural diplomat to Centauri Prime with instructions that had left him sleeping poorly for weeks. The Xerian hegemony had emerged from the Galactic Rim 18 months ago, a militant empire that viewed both humanity and the Centauri as obstacles to their expansion. Their technology was advanced, their fleets numerous, and their diplomatic overtures had consisted primarily of demands for tribute and territorial concessions. Individually, neither Earth nor the Centauri collective possessed sufficient military strength to resist the hegemony. Together, they might stand a chance, but such an alliance would require unprecedented cooperation between species whose fundamental approaches to existence remained radically different. The Centauri's collective harmony versus humanity's chaotic individualism. Consensus-based decision-making versus hierarchical command structures. Philosophical problems that became practical ones when lives hung in the balance. The situation is complex, Marcus said carefully. They were still in a public space, where their conversation might be monitored by any number of interested parties. Perhaps we could discuss it somewhere more private? Lyra's transportation was a personal vehicle that moved through the city's arterial tubes with the fluid grace that characterized all Centauri technology. Marcus watched the familiar districts flow past, noting changes and expansions, feeling the strange double vision of seeing a place through both childhood memories and adult understanding. "You've been thinking about the promise," Lyra said suddenly, her attention focused on the city flowing past rather than on Marcus. It wasn't a question. Marcus touched the pendant unconsciously. "How did you know?" "Your skin patterns," she said then, caught herself, and shifted to amusement. "A joke. But you do have tells, Marcus. The way you hold your left shoulder when you're carrying emotional weight. You did it as a boy when you were homesick. You're doing it now when you're, what would you call it?" Terrified, Marcus admitted. Not of the hegemony, not of the alliance negotiations. Of what this alliance might cost humanity if we get it right. Lyra's patterns shifted to the deep contemplation he remembered from their youth. The convergence problem. Marcus nodded. The convergence problem was the elephant in the room that no one wanted to discuss directly. Every alliance between species eventually led to cultural blending, and cultural blending led to homogenization. The species that formed successful partnerships tended to adopt each other's strengths while losing their unique characteristics. Given the Centauri's more advanced technology and deeply sophisticated social organization, any alliance would inevitably push humanity towards Centauri models of thought and behavior. In the short term, this would solve many of humanity's problems. Wars would end when humans learned collective decision-making. Environmental destruction would cease when they embraced Centauri harmony with natural systems. Social inequality would disappear under Centauri principles of resource distribution. But in the long term, humanity would cease to be human in any meaningful sense. The chaotic creativity that had made them valuable to the galactic community would be smoothed away in favor of efficient cooperation. The very qualities that had enabled them to develop faster-than-light travel through pure stubborn determination would be replaced by more logical approaches that would never have succeeded in the first place. "I've been studying the projections," Marcus said quietly. "If we form this alliance, if we adopt Centauri military doctrine and social organization to fight the hegemony, we'll win. But humanity as a distinct species will be extinct within 3 generations. We'll be humans who think like Centauri, dream like Centauri, create like Centauri. We'll be peaceful, efficient, and utterly predictable. And if you don't form the alliance..." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The hegemony destroys us both. Separately, we're not strong enough to resist them. They've made that clear." They traveled in silence for several minutes, the weight of the dilemma settling between them like a living thing. Lyra's vehicle carried them through the memory district, where the great crystalline archives stored the collective experiences of Centauri civilization. Marcus found himself wondering if those archives contained any record of a species that had faced a similar choice, and what they had decided. "There might be a third option," Lyra said finally, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus turned to study her profile, noting the tension in her patterns that suggested she was about to say something that frightened her. "What kind of third option?" "One that would require both of us to sacrifice everything we've built, everything we've become, for the possibility of something that might not work." They were approaching Lyra's residential complex, a graceful spiral of living crystal that housed some of Centauri Prime's most brilliant minds. Marcus could see other residents moving through transparent tubes, their bioluminescent patterns creating a constant light show that was both beautiful and functional. Each pattern told a story, conveyed emotions, shared information in ways that humans could appreciate, but never fully understand. "Tell me," Marcus said. Lyra's vehicle settled onto her private platform, its organic systems interfacing with the building's infrastructure with a seamless efficiency that made Centauri technology seem like magic to human observers. She sat in silence for a moment, her patterns shifting through configurations that spoke of internal struggle. "Not here," she said finally. "This conversation requires the kind of privacy that even our most secure facilities cannot guarantee. We need to go to the Memory Gardens." The Memory Gardens were located at the heart of Centauri Prime, a vast park where the city's crystalline communication networks converged into something approaching consciousness. It was the closest thing the Centauri had to a sacred space, where their ancestors' memories lived on as part of the collective experience that guided their civilization. More importantly for their purposes, the garden's natural harmonics made electronic surveillance impossible, while the cultural taboos surrounding the space meant they were unlikely to be overheard. They walked through paths lined with singing crystals, each one storing fragments of Centauri history in the form of musical memories that played when touched by specific emotional resonances. The air itself seemed alive with possibilities, charged with the accumulated dreams of billions of beings who had contributed their experiences to the collective wisdom that governs Centauri society. "The third option," Lyra began, her voice almost lost in the garden's musical backdrop, "requires us to believe that your memory keeper's vision was accurate. That the choice you face is between your personal happiness and the future of our civilizations." Marcus felt the pendant grow warm against his chest. "You know about that. I was there, remember? And Grandmother Shai shared her memories of that day with the Memory Collective before she passed into the deep contemplation. Her vision has been studied extensively by our xenocultural analysts. They had reached the center of the gardens, where a massive crystal formation rose like a tree made of frozen light. This was the heart of memory, the same artifact Marcus had encountered as a boy, but grown larger over the decades, fed by the experiences of countless Centauri who had contributed their most profound insights to its crystalline matrix. The vision showed 2 possible futures for humanity, Lyra continued. One where they learned harmony and lost their essential nature, and another where they remained chaotic but learned to channel that chaos constructively. But the vision also showed the moment of choice that would determine which path humanity followed. Marcus approached the heart of memory, feeling its presence touch the edges of his consciousness like a familiar friend. The crystal pendant around his neck began to resonate with a larger formation, creating harmonics that seemed to unlock memories he didn't know he possessed. The choice involves a sacrifice, he said, the words coming from some deep understanding rather than conscious thought. Someone has to give up everything they want for themselves to ensure that humanity finds the right path forward. Someone who understands both worlds, Lyra agreed. Someone who can speak for humanity while thinking like a Centauri. Someone who made a promise as a boy to remember, to learn, to see through alien eyes while remaining human. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You're talking about me becoming a bridge. Not just diplomatic liaison, but something more fundamental. A human who lives among the Centauri, who thinks with Centauri wisdom but dreams human dreams. A sacrifice that would preserve both civilizations while preventing either from being absorbed by the other. But the personal cost, Lyra's patterns shifted to deep sorrow. You would have to give up everything that makes life worth living for a human. Family, career, the ability to live among your own kind. You would become something unique, neither fully human nor Centauri, belonging to both worlds while being accepted by neither. Marcus placed his hand on the heart of memory, feeling its vast consciousness touch his thoughts with alien gentleness. Images flashed through his mind, the same visions he'd experienced as a boy, but more detailed now, showing exactly what the sacrifice would entail. He saw himself years in the future, changed in ways that went beyond the physical. His thoughts would still be human in their chaos and creativity, but they would be structured through Centauri frameworks of understanding. He would dream in human metaphors, but think in Centauri harmonics. He would become a living translation between species, carrying the essence of humanity into Centauri society while bringing Centauri wisdom back to Earth. The transformation would be irreversible. The deep changes required would make it impossible for him to return to a purely human existence. He would spend the rest of his life as a bridge between worlds, valuable to both but truly belonging to neither. And the alliance that would result from his sacrifice would be unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Instead of one species absorbing the other, both would remain distinct while learning to work together in ways that preserve their essential natures. Humanity would remain chaotic and creative, but their chaos would be tempered by Centauri wisdom. The Centauri would remain harmonious and efficient, but their harmony would be enriched by human innovation. Together, they would become something unprecedented, a true partnership that made both species stronger without diminishing either. The hegemony wouldn't stand a chance, Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. Not against a force that combines Centauri technology and organization with human tactical unpredictability. They'd expect us to fight like separate species, not as a genuine fusion. But the personal cost to you, Lyra's patterns now showed anguish. Marcus, you have to understand what you'd be giving up. The chance for a normal life, for love, for belonging somewhere. You'd be saving two civilizations by accepting permanent exile from both. Marcus thought about his life on Earth, his career, the woman he'd been considering proposing to before this assignment. He thought about the future he'd planned, the children he'd hoped to have, the simple human pleasures that would become impossible if he chose this path. Then, he thought about the alternative. Humanity absorbed into Centauri collective consciousness, their chaotic creativity extinct within 3 generations. Or both species destroyed by the hegemony, because they couldn't work together effectively enough to resist. There's something else, isn't there? He said, studying Lyra's patterns. Something you haven't told me. Lyra's entire body shimmered with emotional turmoil. The transformation, it would require a permanent mind link with his Centauri partner. Someone who could help maintain the balance between human and Centauri consciousness, who could anchor the human elements that might otherwise be lost in the integration process. Understanding dawned. I would have to undergo modifications too. Not as extensive as yours, but significant enough that I would no longer be fully Zentari. We would become something new, partners in a way that neither species has ever experienced. Marcus stared at her, seeing the woman she'd become, but remembering the girl who'd been his first alien friend, who'd shared her world with a curious human boy, and helped him understand that the universe was bigger and stranger than he'd ever imagined. "That's the ring, isn't it?" he said suddenly, pieces falling into place. Not a marriage proposal, but something deeper. A permanent bond that would make the transformation possible. Lyra nodded, her patterns now showing a mixture of love, terror, and desperate hope. A bond that would mean giving up everything we've known for the possibility of saving everything we care about. The ring is being crafted now, using techniques that combine human symbolism with Zentari biointegration technology. It would make the connection between us permanent and irreversible. The weight of the choice settled on Marcus like a physical force. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd hoped to become, balanced against the survival of two civilizations and the preservation of what made them unique. The promise he'd made as a boy to remember, to learn, to see through alien eyes while remaining human, had led him to this moment where keeping that promise would transform him into something unprecedented. He looked at Lyra, seeing in her patterns the same struggle he felt, the same terrible understanding of what they were being asked to sacrifice. Two people who'd found friendship across the void, now facing the choice to become something neither fully human nor fully Zentari in order to prevent a future where both species lost themselves. The heart of memory pulsed with gentle light, and Marcus felt the crystal pendant grow warm against his chest. The promise he'd made as a boy echoed in his mind, but now he understood its true weight. Some promises, once made, shaped everything that came after. Some choices, once faced, could not be avoided. The boy who'd promised to remember was about to discover what remembering truly cost. The Xerian hegemony fleet appeared at the edge of the Zentari system 3 days after Marcus made his decision, their massive warships dropping out of hyperspace with the arrogant precision of a species that had never known defeat. Admiral Corex, the hegemony's primary negotiator, contacted both Earth and Zentari authorities simultaneously with a message that was brutally simple: surrender now or be destroyed piecemeal. Marcus watched the transmission from the Strategic Command Center buried deep within Zentari Prime's crystalline core, his newly modified physiology allowing him to process information through both human intuition and Zentari analytical frameworks simultaneously. The transformation had begun 24 hours ago, triggered by the moment he'd accepted the bio-integrated ring that now pulsed with soft light around his finger. The ring that connected him permanently to Lyra, who stood beside him experiencing the same disorienting shift between species consciousness. The changes weren't purely mental. Marcus could feel his neural pathways rewiring themselves to accommodate Zentari thought patterns while preserving the chaotic creativity that made him fundamentally human. His senses had expanded to perceive the harmonic frequencies that carried information through Zentari technology, while his emotional responses had developed new depths that allowed him to understand the collective consciousness that guided Zentari society. Lyra's transformation was equally dramatic. Her natural Zentari harmony now incorporated elements of human unpredictability, giving her access to tactical thinking that no pure Zentari could achieve. She could feel Marcus's thoughts through their biolink, not as invasion, but as expansion, each of them becoming more than they had been individually. 48 hours, Admiral Corex's scaled features dominated the holographic display, his yellow eyes reflecting the cold calculation of a predator. You will surrender your fleets, dismantle your defensive installations, and prepare your populations for relocation to designated labor worlds. Resistance will be met with the complete annihilation of your species. The human delegation exchanged glances that spoke of barely controlled panic. Admiral Harrison, Earth's senior military commander in the sector, had 40 ships under his command, a respectable force by human standards, but insignificant compared to the hegemony's battle fleet. The Centauri command structure maintained its characteristic calm, but Marcus could feel their underlying anxiety through his enhanced awareness. Their fleet composition is exactly what our intelligence predicted, Lyra said, her voice carrying new harmonics that somehow made her words accessible to both species' command staff simultaneously. 67 capital ships, supporting vessels, and what appear to be planetary bombardment platforms. Traditional formation, optimized for overwhelming, isolated targets. Marcus nodded, his hybrid consciousness processing tactical data in ways that surprised him with their clarity. They're expecting us to fight as separate forces. Classic divide and conquer strategy. They'll target Earth's fleet first, using its destruction to demoralize the Centauri, then systematically eliminate Centauri vessels while their collective decision-making process struggles to adapt. Admiral Harrison leaned forward, his weathered features reflecting decades of military experience. Ambassador Chun, with respect, tactical analysis is my department. We need to focus on diplomatic solutions before this turns into a shooting war we can't win. The time for purely diplomatic solutions ended when they entered our system with a battle fleet, Marcus replied, but his tone carried new depths that made the Admiral pause. Admiral, I'm not just providing analysis anymore. Through the biolink with Lyra, I'm serving as a real-time translation interface between human and Centauri command structures. We can coordinate our forces in ways that no previous alliance has achieved. The Centauri High Consul, a being whose scarification indicated centuries of accumulated wisdom, spoke in harmonics that most humans would have found incomprehensible. But Marcus heard both the words and their deeper meaning. The hybrid consciousness offers possibilities we had not considered. If the human and Centauri fleets could truly function as a unified force rather than allied, but separate entities, our combined capabilities might prove adequate. More than adequate, Marcus said, his awareness expanding through the biolink to encompass tactical data from both fleets simultaneously. The hegemony's advantage lies in their superior individual ship technology and their experience fighting traditional military hierarchies. But they've never encountered a force that combines human tactical flexibility with Centauri technological integration. Lyra moved to the central planning table, her modified consciousness allowing her to interface directly with the command center's crystal matrix. Instantly, holographic displays showed both fleets in real time, their positions and capabilities merged into a single tactical overview that had never before been possible. Observe, she said, her patterns now visible even to human eyes due to bioluminescent modifications that accompanied her transformation. If we coordinate human and Centauri vessels at the squadron level, integrating their different strengths, the tactical display shifted, showing mixed formations where human ships provided unpredictable strike capabilities while Centauri vessels offered superior defensive systems and electronic warfare capacity. The result was a fleet doctrine that neither species could have developed independently, one that turned their differences into complementary advantages. Admiral Harrison studied the formations with growing excitement. This could actually work. Our hit-and-run tactics combined with Centauri shielding technology, but the coordination required would be impossible with normal communication delays. Not impossible, Marcus said, feeling the biolink pulse with shared understanding. Lyra and I can serve as instantaneous communication relays between the command structures. Human tactical intuition translated into Centauri organizational frameworks in real time. The next 18 hours passed in frantic preparation as both fleets reorganized themselves into the unprecedented hybrid formations. Marcus found himself functioning as more than a translator. He was becoming a living bridge between species. His consciousness expanded to encompass tactical thinking that drew on both human creativity and Centauri precision. The transformation was taking its toll. He could feel his purely human thought patterns fading, replaced by something richer but alien. Simple human pleasures like humor, music, and art were becoming incomprehensible to him unless filtered through Zentari aesthetic frameworks. He was gaining vast new forms of understanding while losing aspects of himself that he never realized were important. Lyra was experiencing similar changes. Her natural Zentari harmony was being disrupted by human emotional volatility, making her uncomfortable around her own people while giving her access to tactical insights that pure Zentari thinking could never achieve. They were becoming something new, neither fully human nor Zentari, evolved specifically to solve problems that required both species' perspectives. "The personal cost is higher than we anticipated," she said during a brief respite, her patterns showing struggle mixed with determination. "I can feel myself becoming alien to my own culture, while you're losing your humanity one thought at a time." Marcus touched the bio-integrated ring, feeling its warmth pulse in rhythm with both their heartbeats. The Memory Keeper's vision was accurate. We're sacrificing our individual identities to preserve our species' identities. The question is whether we can maintain enough of ourselves to make the sacrifice worthwhile. The answer came when the Hegemony fleet moved to attack. Admiral Corex had clearly expected either immediate surrender or desperate, uncoordinated resistance from two species fighting separately. What he encountered instead was something unprecedented in galactic military history, a truly integrated multi-species fleet that combined radically different tactical philosophies into something greater than the sum of its parts. The opening engagement demonstrated the hybrid doctrine's potential. Human destroyers emerged from hyperspace at unexpected angles, their chaotic attack patterns impossible to predict using traditional military analysis. But instead of fighting alone, they were supported by Zentari battleships whose defensive systems had been coordinated to create overlapping fields of protection that no single ship could penetrate. Marcus felt every moment of the battle through his enhanced consciousness, his awareness distributed across dozens of ships as he translated human tactical innovations into Zentari command frequencies. Lyra's thoughts merged with his, her understanding of Zentari technology allowing real-time optimization of defensive systems, while his human intuition guided strike patterns that defied logical analysis. Impossible. Admiral Corex's transmission reached the Allied command center as his formation struggled to adapt to tactics they had never encountered. No species fights like this. What have you become? The question struck Marcus with unexpected force. What had they become? He was no longer fully human, could no longer think in purely human terms or find satisfaction in purely human experiences. But he wasn't Zentari either, couldn't achieve the harmony and collective consciousness that defined their species. He was something new, something that existed specifically to bridge the gap between civilizations. "We become what we needed to become," he transmitted back, his words carried simultaneously through human communication channels and Zentari harmonic networks. "You're not fighting two separate species anymore, Admiral. You're fighting something the galaxy has never seen before." The battle raged for 6 hours, with the Hegemony fleet's superior technology gradually overcome by tactics that no military doctrine had prepared them for. Human unpredictability guided by Zentari precision. Zentari defensive coordination enhanced by human tactical creativity. Individual ships that fought with the strengths of both species while covered by support systems that compensated for their weaknesses. But the true breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the biolink could be extended beyond just himself and Lyra. Working together, they began establishing temporary connections with ship captains from both fleets, allowing human and Zentari commanders to share consciousness during critical moments. A human captain could suddenly understand Zentari defensive philosophy from the inside, while a Zentari commander could experience the emotional rush that drove human tactical innovation. The effect was transformative. Individual ships began fighting with capabilities that neither species could achieve alone, their crews temporarily experiencing expanded consciousness that drew on both human and Zentari strengths. The hybrid fleet became something unprecedented, a military force that literally thought with the minds of two species simultaneously. Admiral Korex's final transmission came as his flagship suffered critical damage from coordinated strikes that had anticipated his defensive responses with impossible accuracy. What manner of abomination have you created? This is not natural evolution. This is deliberate contamination of species purity. Marcus felt the hegemony admiral's words like physical blows, each accusation highlighting the magnitude of what he and Lyra had sacrificed. They had indeed contaminated themselves, become something impure by the standards of any single species. But that contamination had saved both humanity and the Zentari from absorption or destruction. We created what was necessary, Marcus replied, his consciousness now so thoroughly hybrid that he could barely remember what purely human thinking felt like. We chose to become bridges rather than let our species be destroyed by their inability to bridge themselves. The hegemony fleet retreated after losing a third of their capital ships to tactics they couldn't counter. But their retreat brought no celebration, only the somber recognition of what victory had cost. Marcus stood in the observation deck where his journey had begun 23 years earlier, watching the alien stars and feeling the weight of irreversible transformation. Lyra joined him, her modified patterns reflecting emotions that no pure Zentari could experience, while no pure human could fully understand. The integration is accelerating, she said quietly. In another few days, we'll be so changed that our original species will barely recognize us. The bridge will be complete, but the individuals who built it will be gone forever. Marcus touched the bio-integrated ring, feeling its pulse synchronize with alien harmonics that were becoming as natural as his own heartbeat. The boy who made the promise is gone already. I can remember him, but I can't think like him anymore. The man who came here to form an alliance doesn't exist either. We've become something else entirely. Something necessary, Lyra agreed. Something that will ensure both species survive while remaining true to their essential natures. But something that can never belong fully to either world. They stood in silence, watching the stars and feeling the weight of the choice they'd made. The promise had been kept, the price paid, the bridge built. But the true test lay ahead, learning to live as permanent exiles from both the worlds they'd saved, finding meaning in an existence that preserved two species by sacrificing the individuals who'd made that preservation possible. The boy who'd made a promise as a child had grown into a man who'd returned with a ring, but that ring bound him to a fate that neither boy nor man could have fully understood. He'd kept his word to remember, to learn, to see through alien eyes while remaining human. But keeping that promise had required him to become something that was no longer entirely human, no longer entirely anything except the bridge itself. The transformation was nearing completion, and with it would come the final test, whether the hybrid consciousness they'd created could find purpose in permanent exile from both the worlds it had been designed to connect. 5 years after the hegemony's defeat, Marcus Chun stood in the center of what had become known as the Bridge Sanctuary, a unique facility that existed simultaneously within Zentari Prime and in orbit above Earth through quantum-linked architecture that defied the understanding of either species individually. The sanctuary served as both home and headquarters for the hybrid consciousness that Marcus and Lyra had become, a place where beings who no longer belonged fully to any single species could exist without causing discomfort to the pure breed populations they served. The transformation was complete now. Marcus looked human to human eyes and Zentari to Zentari senses, but he was neither. His thoughts operated through frameworks that drew equally from both species' cognitive patterns. His emotions encompassed ranges that neither could experience alone, and his understanding of the universe incorporated perspectives that no single consciousness could achieve. He had become, quite literally, a bridge between worlds. Lyra moved through the sanctuary's crystal gardens with the same hybrid grace, her patterns now displaying colors and configurations that had never existed in pure Zentari biology. She was simultaneously more and less than she had been, expanded beyond her original nature while cut off from the collective consciousness that had once defined her existence. The Andromedan delegation has arrived. She informed Marcus through the biolink that connected them permanently. Her words carried information on multiple levels: diplomatic status, emotional undertones, and tactical assessments that would have required lengthy briefings for purely single-species minds to process. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle around him like a mantle. The defeat of the hegemony had attracted attention from across the galaxy, particularly from species who face similar threats, but lacked the unprecedented cooperation that the Human-Zentari alliance represented. Over the past 5 years, Marcus and Lyra had become something unique in galactic history. Diplomatic translators who could facilitate understanding between radically different species by serving as living examples of successful integration. The work was rewarding in ways that transcended personal satisfaction, but the cost remained constant. Every successful mediation took them further from their original natures. Every bridge built required pieces of themselves to serve as foundation stones. They were saving civilizations by sacrificing their own ability to belong to any civilization completely. The Andromedan representatives were unlike any species, either human or Zentari, had previously encountered. Their crystalline forms existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensional frequencies that most species couldn't even perceive, making direct communication nearly impossible. Traditional diplomacy had failed completely, with 3 previous attempts ending in what the Andromedans perceived as incomprehensible rudeness, though no one could determine what had caused offense. They exist across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, Marcus explained to the assembled diplomatic teams through the sanctuary's translation matrices. Their consciousness operates in temporal frameworks that experience causality differently than linear species. What appears to us as a conversation is, to them, more like a symphony where past, present, and future harmonize simultaneously. "Can you establish communication?" asked Ambassador Patterson, Earth's senior diplomat to the galactic community. She was one of the few pure human officials who could work effectively with Marcus despite his hybrid nature, though he could see the unconscious discomfort in her body language whenever she looked at him directly. "We can," Lyra confirmed, her patterns shifting to configurations that existed nowhere in traditional Zentari biology. "But the translation process requires us to temporarily expand our consciousness into dimensions that neither species can normally access. The neural modifications necessary." She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus felt her meaning through their biolink. Each extreme translation event required them to push further beyond their original natures, to sacrifice more of what they had been in order to build bridges to consciousness types they'd never been designed to understand. They were becoming something that served as a universal diplomatic interface, but at the cost of any fixed identity beyond their function as bridges. The first contact session took place in a specially constructed chamber that existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing the Andromedans to manifest in a form that linear species could interact with. Marcus and Lyra positioned themselves at the chamber's center, their biolinked consciousness serving as a translation matrix between dimensional frameworks that had never been bridged before. The moment contact was established, Marcus felt his awareness explode across multiple timelines simultaneously. Through the Andromedan's perspective, he could perceive the conversation as a complete entity that existed all at once, its beginning and end connected in a causal loop that made linear communication seem impossibly primitive. Their concerns about territorial expansion weren't about current threats, but about probability cascades that might occur across multiple possible futures. "They're trying to prevent a war that hasn't happened yet," Marcus reported to the Human-Zentari diplomatic team, his consciousness now operating partially outside normal temporal flow. From their perspective, the hegemony's defeat created probability fluctuations that could lead to galactic instability in 17 different timeline branches. They want to establish preemptive alliances to stabilize the quantum foundations of local spacetime. Lyra's consciousness merged with his, adding Centauri analytical frameworks to his human intuitive understanding of the Andromedans' multidimensional concerns. The alliance they're proposing would require participating species to accept temporal coordination protocols. Essentially, they want to synchronize galactic civilization's development to prevent catastrophic divergence events. The implications were staggering. The Andromedans weren't just offering an alliance. They were proposing to restructure galactic civilization itself around principles that would prevent the kinds of conflicts that led to species extinction. But the coordination required would demand unprecedented cooperation between species whose fundamental natures often made them incompatible. They need bridges, Marcus realized, the understanding hitting him like a physical impact. Not just for communication, but permanent translation interfaces between every major species group. They want to create a network of hybrid consciousness that can facilitate the kind of coordination they're describing. The human delegation exchanged glances that spoke of barely controlled panic. Ambassador Chun, Admiral Harrison said carefully, "Are you suggesting they want to create more individuals like yourself and Lyra?" "Not individuals," Lyra corrected, her patterns now displaying colors that didn't exist in normal space. A network, a civilization-spanning translation matrix that would allow radically different species to coordinate their development across multiple timeline branches. They're offering to help prevent every potential galactic catastrophe in exchange for unprecedented cooperation. Marcus felt the Andromedans' proposal flow through his expanded consciousness, showing him visions of possible futures where galactic civilization achieved harmony without losing the diversity that made it valuable. Humans retained their chaotic creativity while learning temporal awareness. Centauri maintained their collective wisdom while gaining access to multidimensional perspectives. Dozens of other species found ways to preserve their essential natures while participating in coordinated development that prevented the conflicts that typically led to interstellar wars. But the price was the creation of a permanent bridge network staffed by beings who would sacrifice their species' identity to serve as permanent translators between incompatible forms of consciousness. Marcus and Lyra would be the first of many individuals who would voluntarily transform themselves into something unprecedented in order to preserve everything they were leaving behind. "The memory keeper's vision," Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through his hybrid consciousness. This is what she saw. Not just our choice, but the beginning of something that would transform galactic civilization itself. He felt the crystal pendant pulse against his chest, the fragment of the heart of memory responding to his realization. The promise he'd made as a boy hadn't been about a single alliance or even a single war. It had been about the moment when galactic civilization would face the choice between isolation and coordination, between species purity and collaborative evolution. "How many?" he asked the Andromedans through dimensional frequencies that hurt to access. "How many bridges would this network require?" The answer came as a cascade of probability calculations that nearly overwhelmed his expanded consciousness. Hundreds, possibly thousands of hybrid beings serving as permanent interfaces between species groups that could never communicate directly. Each one would sacrifice their original identity to preserve the identities of entire civilizations. "We would be the architects of our own obsolescence," Lyra said, her bio-linked thoughts merging with his imperfect understanding. "We would build a system that makes species like us necessary while ensuring we can never belong to the species we're designed to serve." The weight of the choice settled on them like gravity from a collapsed star. They had already sacrificed their humanity and Centauri nature to build a single bridge between two species. Now they were being asked to design and populate an entire network of bridges that would reshape galactic civilization itself. But the alternative was the slow dissolution of interstellar cooperation as species groups retreated into isolation to preserve their unique natures, eventually leading to the kinds of conflicts that had nearly destroyed both humanity and the Centauri. The hegemony had been just the beginning. Without unprecedented coordination, the galaxy would face centuries of increasingly destructive wars between incompatible civilizations. "There's something else," Marcus said, his consciousness touching deeper aspects of the Andromedans' proposal. "They're not just offering to help create this network. They're offering to provide the template for permanent hybrid consciousness biointegration technology that would allow bridge beings to maintain stable identities despite incorporating multiple species' cognitive frameworks." Lyra's patterns shifted to amazement tinged with hope. "We wouldn't have to keep losing pieces of ourselves every time we facilitate a new kind of communication. We could become stable hybrid entities rather than gradually dissolving into pure function." The possibility was intoxicating. Marcus had felt himself becoming less human and less individual with every diplomatic success. His identity slowly subsumed into his role as a translation interface. The prospect of stabilizing his hybrid nature, of finding a way to exist as something coherent rather than something that was slowly dissipating, offered hope he hadn't dared acknowledge. "But we would still be the first," he said quietly. "The prototypes, the proof that such transformations are possible and worthwhile. Our success or failure would determine whether anyone else would be willing to make similar sacrifices." "The promise," Lyra said, her biolinked consciousness sharing his understanding. "The boy who promised to remember, to learn, to see through alien eyes while remaining human. This is how that promise is kept, by becoming the foundation for a network that allows everyone to see through alien eyes without losing themselves." Marcus looked around the bridge sanctuary, seeing it suddenly not as an isolated refuge for two individuals who no longer belonged anywhere, but as the prototype for facilities that could exist throughout the galaxy. Places where hybrid beings could live and work, serving as translation interfaces while maintaining their own unique forms of existence. The decision came not as a single moment of choice, but as a gradual recognition that the choice had already been made years ago when he'd accepted the biointegrated ring. Every step since then had been leading to this moment, when the bridge they'd built between two species would become the foundation for a network that could unite civilizations across the galaxy. "We accept," Marcus said to the Andromedans, his words carrying across dimensional frequencies that made reality itself ring like a struck bell. "We'll help design the network, train the first generation of bridge beings, and serve as proof that such transformations can create something valuable rather than just destroying what came before." The Andromedans' response came as a cascade of temporal harmonics that felt like approval and gratitude expressed across multiple timeline branches simultaneously. They began transmitting technical specifications that would allow the biointegration process to be refined, stabilized, and replicated on a galactic scale. "The boy who made the promise," Lyra said softly, her patterns now displaying emotions that no single species could experience, kept his word. He remembered, he learned, he saw through alien eyes while remaining human. And in doing so, he became the foundation for something that would allow everyone to do the same. Marcus touched the biointegrated ring, feeling its pulse synchronize with quantum frequencies that connected him not just to Lyra, but to the network they would build together. The ring that had bound him to transformation had become the symbol of transformation's purpose. Not the loss of identity, but the evolution of identity into something that could encompass multiple forms of consciousness while remaining coherent. The promise made by a boy had been kept by a man who'd returned with a ring, but the ring had bound him to become something beyond either boy or man. He'd become the bridge itself, and now that bridge would become the foundation for a network that would reshape galactic civilization forever. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. The boy who'd promised to remember had become the man who would teach the galaxy that remembering could include forms of consciousness that no single species could achieve alone, that seeing through alien eyes could expand rather than diminish what it meant to be truly human or truly anything else worth being. In the end, the greatest promises were kept not by remaining unchanged, but by becoming exactly what was needed to ensure that change preserved rather than destroyed what was most valuable about the worlds that shaped us. The bridge between species had become the bridge to a future where every species could remain themselves while becoming something greater together.